surprise, I'm going to hold over a little bit from our last meeting. Remember, I usually, as an example, when I sprang off on that string of fuck'ems, about a person who was no longer involved with this, and the kind of story that they gave me about the pressures of life and some of the few absolute requirements that I had instigated about not fooling around with dope and alcohol on a regular basis, and how they couldn't handle it. Right, everybody, those of you still here, those of you who are not here yet, and those of you who may yet leave, you shouldn't try and fool yourself. It's bad enough to try and fool me. But you should not refer to, say, your enjoyment of, let's pick the obvious ones before we try to even hint toward the more subtle, but like dope and alcohol. You shouldn't even try and point out that you are using it as some kind of relief for the pressures of life or the tensions of being you personally. Fuck all that. Call it what it is. It's pleasurable. It's a habit. People can't do that, but notice, as always, I am not correct. The city is correct, because in the city, it's even in our lifetime become more so. That is, that view. Habitual behavior. Even some of you are almost old enough to remember, a couple of generations ago, drinking in excess was looked at as being a moral flaw. That a person's character, their resolve, their will to be decent had at least a hairline fracture. But now, there's nothing wrong. It's not open to any sort of laugh. But now, alcoholism is looked at as being a disease. That if you drink too much, it's a disease. And of course, it's not pointed out this way, and it's of no interest to me to give you any prediction, but if the so-called drug problem in the United States, for instance, if it keeps on and on and on and on, you surely do understand that very shortly, cocaine addiction will be looked at as a disease. Now, all of that's fine in the city. Out in the bushes, that ain't fine. It ain't fine at all. Not the cocaine use, per se, not the alcoholism, but the belief for you to be wired up in such a way. Now, in the city, it doesn't matter. I'm going to say it one more time. But you people, your wiring system is supposed to be a little mutated. The possibility's got to be there, or else how and why you keep fooling around with this. It is not all right out in the bushes to believe, and if you say it, you end up believing it, and vice versa, to say that you must have something, very materialistically, alcohol, dope, into more subtle areas, that you must have this because of the kind of relief, because you are able to function better, because it is almost a necessity. Now, in the city, that's true. In the city, that's not true. In the city, that's everything in between. Out in the bushes, that's bullshit. Out in the bushes, that is walking weakness. That is a gaping sore. It's just a sign you're carrying that I'm a dilettante. I wandered out of the city. I was looking for something weird. I can't afford any good dope. We got a shortage in town, and I thought I'd do something weird. The yogi, the cult leader I used to fool with, is in jail. I don't know what else to do, so I'm here. What's happening? That's all you're doing. Because it is not to a would-be revolutionist, anybody with a potential. None of that. Let me go ahead, if I've got to put a few words on the more subtle areas, all the way from booze and dope into things like strange beliefs. From the city, they're not strange, but the kinds of beliefs that people ordinarily have that seem to be spiritual, if not metaphysical. To believe that you must have this because of the pressures, the hard knocks, the rough pavement of life, that is just absolute. There is no good word other than bullshit. It's just silly. But it's bullshit. Forget silly, it's bullshit. I don't know what else to tell you. And besides the profanity, if you don't suspect, if you don't hear a little bit of that again, I hate to tell you, tut, tut, tut. You belong in a refrigerated truck. And it is not that everyone involved with this in some way is born Superman. If you were born Superman or Superwoman, of course you wouldn't be here. But if you do not understand, at least when it's pointed out directly, and for me to be as crude enough to say, well, fuck all that and it's bullshit, and all the other nicer ways I point at it, if something doesn't strike you, you don't have to like it immediately. But if something doesn't strike you, yeah, that's true. There is no excuse for being human. There is no acceptable excuse for being weak. You may be weak. You may have been born with a limp. You may have been born with one arm twisted. That is not an excuse to drink. You may have been born in such a way that the pressures of life, as you call it, the kinds of things that your parents, you think, did, which all parents do, that have now made you, as they used to call it, nervous. If you believe that that is an excuse for engaging your system, interfacing it with narcotics, on the basis that it is needed, you're nuts. Now, to say it's pleasurable, okay. It's pleasurable. To say, well, I'm in the habit of doing it. I've been drinking so long I can't really swear that it's pleasurable anymore to me. This would be somebody, of course, getting the yellow circuit almost back to some level of partial employment for some of their brain cells. To say, all right, I can't guarantee I like drinking, but I've tried to cut down, I've tried to stop several times, but I'm in the habit of doing it. And I'm going to tell you, it's such a habit, I don't think I could stop. All right, say that, but don't say that you need it. Don't say that you're so weak you've got to have it. Don't say that you've got to be nervous. Don't say that you have got to be frightened of life because of so-and-so. Say that it's pleasurable to your nervous system, or, and this covers it all, it's all the same thing, but I'm going to give you, as always, a good binary choice. Either say it's pleasurable to my nervous system, no matter what you call it, or it's a habit that I can't break. Say that. At least be little, if not Superman and Superwoman, be little Superboy and Supergirl. At least have the wherewithal. I fucked around and wasted this much time on you. At least stand up on your toes into a little small mirror and look and say, this gives me pleasure, or it's a habit. But don't say that you need it. Don't say that it keeps your life on an even keel. Don't say that it even makes life bearable enough for you to pursue this. That's bullshit times 2. Because any of you, anybody here and other places watching these tapes, anybody that goes ahead and fools around with dope is drinking on a regular basis. No matter what you believe, you're not involved with this. You're not doing it. No matter how much you think you've learned from hearing me talk. You're not doing this. You're not a part of it because you can't do both. And it's not, I know how tricky this seems in the beginning, it's not simply the alcohol. It's not simply the narcotics on the nervous system. That's enough. You can't do this and be drunk. You can't sit there and do it. I couldn't stand here drunk and do it correctly. I couldn't stand here with one drink and do it correctly. And you sure as hell couldn't sit there with one drink without wasting my time, at the very least. So that is true, but that is not the higher level, the second order danger of that. That is the whole dynamic. Because the whole dynamic is believing that it's something other than a pleasurable habit. Believing it's something other than your nervous system. Enjoying the stimulation. To the point now, of course, someday soon, those who can afford it know somebody who won't have to fool around with alcohol. Narcotics, you just hook it up here and you hit the right place and you got the same sensation. That's what it is. Say that. Don't say that you need it. Don't say that you can't bear life. That may be true. There are all kinds of people that say that and mean it. But if you say that and mean it, you don't belong here. And if you say that and mean it, you're not even here, even if you're here. You're back in the city. That's the way things are arranged. If life is a burden, I mean to the point that you've got to have help, such as religion, narcotics. If life is that stressful to you, which it is to most people in the world, then you're not a part of this. And of course, I'm not criticizing you. And of course, if I were, you wouldn't hear it, you wouldn't take it, because it'd be invalid. It just shows I don't understand the pressures you're under. Something else I haven't mentioned in several years, a lot of you have never heard, that pops up again. And it's not really that much of a change of subject, but it comes out that people ask me, or else say, let me be non-verbally aware of it, that they have certain fears in life. And I'm going to do this one again for people that hadn't heard it, or some variation of it. Let's take one that came out several times over the last few years with people, flying. There's some of us, when I was flying around to these different groups, that some of you started taking up flying around with me on weekends at times. Anyway, it turned out there were some people in the group that were simply afraid of flying, enough that they couldn't hardly do it. I love it when I engage in technical speech. Couldn't hardly do it. I've been back in the South way too long, have I not? I don't know. It's just sometimes I hear me say, couldn't hardly do it. At least I'm not up even for the possibility of a Nobel Prize in speech. And even if I am, I don't want it. It's too cold up there. It's this, that there have been people, and I'm just picking flying. Now this does not have to do, I'm going to tell you one more time, even me saying about that you can't be fooling around narcotics and alcohol and do this, there are people that's been involved with this, and some of you still around, that I know have had chemical imbalances, that I encourage you to go to a doctor. And there are people whose chemistry is such that they've got to take medication just to stay at an even keel. Not for pleasure, not for stimulation, but stay at an even keel. And that, I'll tell you one more time, well, I'll tell you again, probably not the last time, that's not what we're talking about. Such as if you're a diabetic, I'm not telling you to quit treating yourself. Or if indeed you have got the kind of chemical imbalances, there's no doubt that to add certain elements into your blood system, get into the brain, brings you back to an even keel, do it. I've told you that. Go do it. But that is not the basis of a pleasurable stimulation. That's not any different than if you were a cripple, get a crutch. If I was crippled, I'd get a crutch. Same thing about this fear. Fear is not learned. You did not get afraid of flying because your mother was afraid of flying verbally. She may have told you that. You may be deathly afraid of the water, to quote you. And you may say, my mother couldn't swim. And as far back as I can remember, my mother would get close to a big puddle in the street and she'd grab me. She'd say, don't you ever get close to water because you'll drown. And of course it seems obvious. Back in the city, well, she scared me. No, it doesn't. Well, it seems obvious, but that's not it. You don't learn to be afraid of the water. If your mother was afraid of the water, we're simply talking about a genetic strain that's still alive in you, and you may be afraid of the water. I just want you to know that you were born with it. So we're not talking about some kind of, I'm not fixing to bring up some new or surprising form of talking therapy to help you. The real truth is, as I'm going to point out to you, is it doesn't matter where it comes from, but I want you to understand it is not simply something you acquired so that you would feel like, well, I need to go take a course. Like I want to go take a course on how to quit drinking, how to quit being mad, how to get over being afraid of flying. Here's what it amounts to. I was going to give you a way. Well, I'm going to put it sounds simple, but it's more complex. That is, it's simple to do it, to hear what I'm saying, but it affects other things. It draws in other aspects of life's energy, and it's illogical. It's indefensible at the city yellow circuit level. But here it is. And it works. If you belong in this, it works, and I'm giving you a prescription that works. It is a valid treatment. Instead of me writing it out, I'm telling you in very simple words, and it works. If you don't go cash it in, it's your fault. Let us say flying. And I am not making some general, abject fun of anybody having fear, because everybody's got little fears of something. Some people have fears of heights and etc. But let's take flying. It is this kind of attitude that a revolutionist would have, a real Superman, somebody who was actually full-blown operational with the yellow circuit, a real Fripp, not even a full-bred revolutionist. They would do this, assuming they need to fly somewhere. Let's start off with that premise that they need to. It'd be more convenient. And they realize, I even get near an airport. I got on a plane once just to say goodbye to somebody, and I literally began to sweat. Here is what a revolutionist would do with the yellow circuit. Because that's the way you have got to go back down into the circuitry, or else you have got to put in chemicals to affect the chemical basis of the nervous system down there already, such as put dope, get drunk, take 20 Valiums. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how to take the nervous system at the higher, younger, the verbal end, and turn it down and put it to some useful purpose. Here's what it would be. And I'm just going to say it because I don't think there's any possibility of profitably expanding upon it. It's like this. Yellow circuit, verbal-wise. The fear is there. The fear is down the lower circuits. It is chemical. And here it is, this Fripp needs to fly. He would look upon the full panorama, the cycloramic, 4D, time-based view that, all right, they have been flying commercially now that I know of. In a real active way, let's say from 1940. I know they're doing it earlier, but the real commercial, so let's say we've got 40 plus years of scheduled airline travel. And I know that the airport that I'm going today, LAX, O'Hare, that there are, you can go check it, but there got to be 1,000 flights go out today. And on that 1,000 flights, at least there are 200 people. And they do this every day. And I look around here at the airport, and I'm surrounded. Tall people, short people, young people, old people, fat people, thin people. People that look real dumb, rednecks. People that look intelligent, with tweed jackets and little patches on their elbows and pipes in their hand. I look at all of this. I don't see anybody that I can spot that's as scared of this as I am. I don't see anybody huddled down a corner like this, which is where I'd like to be. You look around and you're also aware of this, the kind of things that even the airlines put out, that the odds of there being a fatality on your flight is less than it is of you being hit by not only lightning, but being bitten by an alligator that was just hit by lightning. That only one plane a year in the United States, average, crashes. And you've got 1,000 from each airport. It just gets into every day. What are there? 50,000 flights going on in this country with 200 people on each one. It is simply this. The chances of ordinary life of this plane crashing, and nobody else on this plane that's about to get on with you, nobody shows any sign of having any concern about it. Here's what it is. If everybody else can do it, and everybody else being this plane is filled up, they got standby, somebody will take my seat, all these people, and they're going to get on that plane, and there's hardly any chance they're not going to make it. My fear, fuck it. And that's it. If it does crash, and this is not mere fatalism, it is a more perceptive understanding of how life works. But some of the information, as I said, is right there. It does not take some sort of metaphysical insight. just the information that's available in the city, that if I can look around at this herd of people, and of course if you were a Fripp, you would have some understanding, some suspicion, some well-based suspicion that most people are not as intelligent as you are, not educated, but not as intelligent as you are. And yet this herd on my plane, let's say it's a wide body, and you got 400 people, and they're pushing to get on, and all excited, and they're in line, and they're going to get on and sit down and call for drinks and magazines and smile and chat with their neighbor. And this herd, all 400 put together, did not have the insight that I do, and they're going to get on that plane, and they're going to make it. They're going to get on there, and they're going to fly to the other side of the continent and get off. If I get on with them, I will too. If I get on with this dumb herd of no one showing any fear. And another way I'll push it just a little bit is this: if anybody in the world can stand to do this thing, then I can stand to do it. And that's it. That is it. And yet fear in the human nervous system, when it reaches up to the yellow circuit level and it has to talk about it, it's always on this basis, as it can't be analyzed by ordinary people. It's on the basis that my fear is in some way uniquely justified. That is, yeah, you're right. This plane, there's not a chance in the world. I wouldn't bet you $1,000,000 to 1. I wouldn't waste $1 that this plane's going to crash unless I get on it. And if you believe that that in any way fits into, just forget revolutionary consciousness, does that fit into the ordinary, what should be the ordinary workings of the human yellow circuit, the human intellect? That, yeah, I agree with you. Now that I stand back and there's some chance that nobody can make me get on this flight, and I can live if I don't get on. They hadn't called last call for boarding. And you're right, that plane's going to fill up and it leave here, and I agree with you. There's not a chance in hell this thing's going to crash. One plane a year, at the most, crashes in intercontinental air travel in the United States. And the chances of this plane being it, well, it's right this side of infinitesimal. I agree. Unless I get on it. The belief that you in some way singularly, that your fear will be singularly realized, will come true. If anybody in the world can do it, and you need to do it, if anybody has ever done it, and people are still doing it, I don't mean that one person tried it once and died from it, and everybody else abandoned it, but if it is something that people are routinely doing, forget who, people. Other human nervous systems. Life is arranged thing. Life is arranged a thing we call commercial air travel. Life is also arranged this thing we call humans. And it's arranged that humans and commercial air travel be interdependent. You would not have one without the other. Not humans as we know it today. So life has arranged this. It's not some evil plot that people got together and said, hey, let's invent air travel and we'll get people flying, and then every now and then, just for the fun of it, us guys in charge, we'll make one crash and we'll have a big laugh and they'll kill a lot of people. Plus we can then up the affairs when we do that. Life is doing it. Life is flying these motherfuckers. Not Delta, it's not Eastern. Life is having people fly on it. That's what you've got to understand. Life has arranged this. Every now and then life crashes a plane. And what dies? 100 people? 200 people? Big deal. How many people does life kill every day? How many people is dropping right now, as fast as I can say, an airplane crashed? By the time I said that on this planet right now, how many people died? I'm sure more than 200 or 300, more than one airplane. But still, because of this very peculiar, I'll say, nature of the services life is that man is performing for life, then people believe that they are individually singular, that just my presence on that plane can make it crash. Which, again, I must point out to you, at least in the bushes, that is a wonderfully joyous, funny form of hubris. That God has got it in for me. That good old Larry would let these planes go. They just go in all the time, and he only sees fit to crash one, at least in our part of the world, a year. But if he notices I got on a plane, who knows what will happen? The worst will happen. Let's go from fear to anger. Only the powerless get mad. Well, let's make that the second part. Let me start off, give it to you better. Strike all that like you didn't hear that. Only the inferior get mad. And now, parenthetically, throw in the powerless. But it's only the inferior get mad. Now, that's a fact. In the 3D world, I've got to talk about it in a relative manner and try to give you some room to sneak up on it. And of course, if we were dealing simply with 3D people back in the city, then it's not even true. But I'm telling you that only the inferior get mad. It is then a question of the problem with ordinary consciousness of seeing what a superior person would be. Because 3D consciousness would say, well, everybody gets mad. Anybody could get mad. The world's greatest king could get mad. The most powerful ruler that ever lived could get mad. Ordinary people in the city might even point out so-called religious stories, fairy tales, stories of mythology of some great spiritual figure in history that got mad at somebody or some group of people and said, fire on you people, shame, shame, shame on you people, or sent down a thunderbolt, but got mad, righteously indignant, they love to call it. I'll tell you again, a fact, a bush fact, that only the inferior get mad. It's a fact. It's a physical law. It can't be otherwise. If you get mad, you're inferior. If you get mad, you are not superior to start with. If you get mad, you are no longer superior. And you are powerless. But I wanted to start you off, when I backed up, to inferior. Inferior. To get mad, you have got to be inferior. If you were, and I gave you a little room, and I try and jump from the relative world of the city. If someone were truly superior, and when I say truly, when I say outside the city, we're beyond the world of dichotomies, where one thing can become its opposite, where one thing is in fact part of its opposite, with the third corner missing, unseen, so that people can't realize how it continues to turn, how there's this triaxial movement, how there's this dance, this three-legged dance, and so that everything that is seen as being extant in a binary fashion has, as a part of it, its opposite. Now I'm talking about a greater perception of this around the corner from it, that if we had somebody who was superior, he would have no potential to be inferior. We're talking about somebody, let's say, that had 4 legs instead of 3. He is not going to cut off one of his legs. It would be impossible. A truly superior person, whatever I may mean by that right now, at least by that I mean somebody could not get mad, would not get mad. A superior person could not become his or her apparent opposite. You would have to be inferior to get mad. If you were superior, what would you have to be mad about? How could you get mad? At what would you direct your anger? Of course, at what would you direct your anger normally in the city is what? Fans, electricity, trees, telephone poles? No, I suggest it's other folks. You only get mad if you are inferior to start with. If you were truly a monarch, if you were an irreversible monarch, if you were unconditionally powerful, at what would you have? At whom would you have to be mad? How could you be mad? Think about it at least a second. It's impossible. If you're just listening with 3D consciousness, it's not impossible. And I could go ahead and talk for you. I don't think I will. About how you could be mad, how you could be indeed righteously indignant, how you could be regally pissed because of the folly of your inferiors. You are not superior. The king, the regent, was not superior if he gets mad. Not just an act. Of course, you might note this. the so-called upper classes just in the 3D world. That's part of their training. They believe it's part of their training from one generation to another, is you don't show anger in public. You certainly wouldn't expect, to take an obvious example, to see good Queen, what's her name, Elizabeth of England, to be walking along with her little handbag away from a carriage somewhere and maybe catch her heel and look down and go, God damn! You do not expect that, and it does not normally happen. They believe that it's sort of good breeding, if not good training, but they call it, they look at it as being almost the same thing, but you don't get anger in public. That was kind of an aside that, again, there's some part of life's body always attempting to imitate, through reflection, a fuller manifestation of what would be going on if you had a piece of you at least around the corner, and that you were operating beyond the 2D world of Buckingham Palace in Atlanta, Georgia, and of course the privacy of your own skull. Only the inferior get weak. And what do they get? Get mad. And what do they have to get mad at? Everything. Everything. If you're inferior, everything is just for your madness. But there is a simple solution, that if you cease being inferior, you will cease being mad. You will not cease necessarily perceiving, remembering what it was that made you mad in the past in your inferior state. You are not blind to what others believe is justifiable bases of anger and hostility on their part. It's just as clear as buttermilk to you. But if indeed you have left the ranks of the inferior, there is nothing at which, no one at whom to be mad. I will leave a certain breathing room if someone had the audacity to come up and kick you in your private parts or to deliberately step on your toe. And far be it from me to keep you from taking appropriate action. But the kind of singular human angers, the so-called emotional, the so-called intellectual, the so-called philosophical differences, economic, class differences, only the inferior get mad. A corollary to that, I might as well go ahead and start to say breeding lessons, but don't start doing that while you're trying to watch the tape. It's hard to. Something else. The powerful do not shout. Have I pointed out the obvious again? Have you ever seen a film of good Queen Elizabeth? What's the Queen of the Netherlands, the world's richest human? Beatrice, whoever it is. Have you ever seen a photograph, a movie of the Pope? I'll throw him into the crowd. Hollering, hey! Now the Queen turned around to somebody, and she said something, such as, hand me a handkerchief, and I said, hand me a... No. Think back if they had film. If they had film back and you were seeing pictures of Moses or Buddha or whoever. Can you imagine? No, because normally that is not, even in the city. It's reflected again, but of course I mean something more than that. But the powerful do not shout. They do not. And even what appears to be the powerful, that is, I was renamed for you several nights ago, if you remember, the continuity class, what would seem to be the real upper powerful classes in the city, that's the sort of thing they believe they instill and teach, and that is indigenous to their class, is they simply don't shout. It's just not done. It's tacky. It's ill-mannered. You don't get in public and you don't shout at a waiter. You don't shout at your children. You don't have them, contrarily, if you notice their children don't holler a lot. You don't shout. If you're down there playing in the yard and we're sitting out in the patio, you don't holler, "Can I go do so-and-so?" You come up close and the little child says, "Mother, may I go do so-and-so?" The mother says yes or no. But don't shout. Come up and just speak in a natural voice, but do not shout. All right. I assume everybody knows I'm not here to play Miss Manners. I would like for you to consider internally now, you personally, this physical law. It's not only a fact, all my facts are physical laws somewhere, whether you ever get there to realize it or not, that the powerful do not shout. Now, individually, internally, can you see any pertinence to the kind of continual, pushy, loud, adamant declarations and decisions you seem to make in your life and always have? Well, you do. You did. When an ordinary person internally decides, well, I'm going to quit smoking, they holler, "God damn, I'm going to quit smoking. I'm sick of that. I'm going to quit drinking. I am. Do you hear me?" Like you're telling yourself, "You weak son of a bitch. You're going, look at us. Look at what you've done to us by this drinking. Lost 3 wives, 14 children. Can't even count the jobs. We got to stop this." What seems to be the two ends, or the two areas of the human nervous system under ordinary conditions that can speak to itself and then hear itself, it continually, when it gets to what seems to be declarations and decisions aimed at itself, it's a continual shout. Now, of course, I'm going to try to get you to see a little further than this, but right to this point, do enough of you hear the reality of that? Under any ordinary condition, you have never sat down, stood up, but to use a figure of speech, you have never sat down with yourself and said, as you might imagine now, the King of Spain sitting his son down, and he says, "Some of the staff out in the summer house said that they saw you smoking, and I told you I don't want you to smoke. Have I not told you that?" Have you ever set yourself down and made such a decision, made such an announcement to yourself? You're far too angry with people. We should not do that. You shout. You know why? Because you're fucking powerless. And it's the powerless that shout, not the powerful. And it's not class, but notice how it works out. Go over in Atlanta to the Buckhead area, in L.A., up in the hills, in New York, out to Long Island, and you drive through their neighborhood and you hear different sounds than you do if you go over in a housing project. It's the people living out in house trailers, mobile homes, in housing projects, tar paper shacks. You drive through there and you don't hear birds tweeting, you don't hear brooks rippling, you hear people shouting, "Hey, old Dale, I told you not to do that. Leave your sister alone. Come in for dinner. Get away from that tree." Ah, shut the fuck up. How many times I told you not to do that? That and the sounds of... But notice in the city, somebody can say, "Well, hey, boy, you're pointing out the obvious again." That's true, because that's a matter of class and economics. God, are people blind? That is, they want to see anything. That's just a figure of speech. People are not blind. But people believe they're wanting superior information, something secret. There it is. Just another example. That's based upon the nervous system. It is based upon the needs life has, and it's produced different types of people to such a degree that they can even be classified into larger areas, what appears to be the basis of economics, taste, breeding, culture. It's just different kinds of nervous systems. There's a Cocker Spaniel over here, and there's a Labrador over here. There's a Pekingese over here, and there's a St. Bernard over here. They're all canines. They're all people. And you've got as much in common with the Rockefellers as you do Bubba and his brothers Odell and Hairlip. But you also have a nervous system on a larger area that is differentiated. We got to turn the tape over. You really should not, as fast as I go by, because you hadn't noticed things and I'm going faster and faster, you shouldn't even let that kind of thing slip by, that in the nicer sections of any town, any city, any part of the world, people, you do not hear them shouting. They don't shout to their children out in the yard. The children don't shout back to the parents. The children don't shout at each other. And then you get into the other areas of the city. And it's nothing but shouting on the street corners, in the ghettos, in the neighborhoods, in the parks. People are shouting. And you just never notice. Or if it's pointed out, you go, yeah, but that's how it is. Low class people shout. Me, middle class, I don't shout that much. Of course, upper class love you because you give a buffer. You believe that, hey, I can distance myself from the real down-home shouters, which my parents were, but now I'm moving up. And someday I'll be up with the big guys, and the big guys go, ooh, ooh, ooh. No way. But as long as you think that, at least, if the lowers try to get at us, they got to go through you first, because you're going to be afraid they're going to take over your place anyway. So you think, well, I may shout a little, but I am not a dyed-in-the-wool shouter. I am not a habitual shouter. I'll get over it. I don't shout as much as I used to. Hell yeah, you do. You may not be shouting as much externally as your parents did at you, because you may now move from some government-supported housing project into a condo with some other people that far above the low class. But now you're middle class, and if you shout too much, they up your fee every month. So you may believe, well, I've become more cultured. Internally, you still shout. Every time you think about going to church, every time you think about joining some strange religious group or going to a lecture. Because we might notice over the last few years I've started being a little more dramatic, and sometimes I seem to shout here, but say, I shout for you. I'm doing it for you. I don't mean to help you, I'm doing it as your part. It's not necessary I shout. I can do it in a monotone. Internally, you may believe that you are now more middle class. You may believe that you're more cultured. You may believe that you have a more insight into the workings of human nature, including your children, and that you try not to shout, which is always good. If you can't really fall back on, well, I don't shout as much, you can always say, well, I'm trying not to shout. But remember, in the city, it's what did Noble's man, what was it Kyroots said that he saw? It's not what man can do that ennobles him. It's what he could do. Doesn't that just make you want to cry? So you can say that you try not to shout, but you still shout. And what shouts in you is the powerless. And they're the ones that try and make all the decisions. That's the reason you should not shout. That's the reason that you should ignore that which shouts into you. It is these declarations that seem to be of personal importance, that seem to be of some individual significance, that seem to be at least on the verge of making a decision that we, says it to its other part, we have got to do so-and-so. And it shouts. It's not a psychological game, it's not psychological explanations I'm giving you, but it would sound like, if we were doing that it would be a kind of proof, it would kind of be an exaggerated form of whistling in the dark, that those who know they're absolutely powerless shout. A flea attacking an elephant and tries to get a bullhorn. Get out of my way. You don't know who you're dealing with. Of course, in that scenario, notice, would an elephant shout back once he realizes it's a flea? Would an elephant holler, You better watch it. Would an elephant get angry? How dare you speak to me like that? If he did, we would have a strange situation, because you would have an elephant, at least from some 3D view, that was not superior any longer to a flea. And you would have an elephant that may get pinned 2 out of 3 times by the flea. Where I was going to try and leave you beside the path on this is throughout your life, everyone's nervous system is arranged in such a way, it is the powerless, it is the, from a revolutionary view, it is your inferior parts that attempt to make the decisions. They shout, and it is those parts, at that part, that gets angry. But as far as what is potential for you, not back in the city, not the ennobling aspect of what man could be, we're talking about something you are attempting to do, something that potentially you can do if you're correctly born into this, is all the parts that shout at you and all the parts that get angry, even at you. That is, the parts that say, you weak son of a gun. Boy, you'll never amount to anything. It's the inferior part. Assuming there is some potentially superior part, there's some better part of you that you're attempting to follow. Some sort of little guiding light, some kind of buzz that brought you here. It is not the part that will get mad. Perhaps you got an elephant getting all upset over a flea, and you've got an elephant that now, even from a materialistic 3D view, is no longer even superior to the flea. Any part of you that you might be able to trust, I'm trying to leave you here to realize that whatever it is internally with you, and not just the audible, even internal sound waves of you talking to yourself. When I say shout, shout is not just volume. Remember I said adamant, pushy is shouting. If you're a king, he wouldn't have to just shout, but if he was going to finally display his inferiority, he wouldn't just have to shout audibly. It's not just the volume of the sound, it's one of his subjects. It would not simply reveal his inferiority just by the audible volume of his shout. It would be that if he was shouting, like insisting, being adamant, being pushy, on the basis of, don't you know that I know more than you? Don't you know that I am your superior? Don't you know that I'm your king? This subject, put all this inside now, of course, but this subject either knows that this is the king talking to me, or he don't. And if the king's talking to him and you don't know, how are you going to make him know? If somebody's that big of a fool, what are you going to do with him? Make him court jester, I guess. Make him assistant king. But if he does not know he's talking to the king, what good is it going to be for the king to come down off of the throne, take his crown off and wave it at him and say, do you know what this is? Do you know what these robes mean? Me wearing purple. Do you know? Yeah. To be pushy with you, to shout at you, is a display of continuing weakness, and the source of it inside of you, inside of life, but inside of you, the source is coming through that part of your own nervous system, your genetic makeup, that is inferior. Now, it may not be any worse than the city norm. I don't mean in some way that it is uniquely inferior to you, but it is inferior. That is, it is no better than line level consciousness. It is no better than the general herd consciousness of everybody else in the city. It will take you nowhere. It is inferior. It may be the general level in the city, and it may be as good as anybody in the city will ever do. But if that's as good as you will ever do, then you ain't going to do good. In other words, you've reached it. You are home free. The final score has been posted. You just don't know it. The results have been announced. You just hadn't read the paper yet. Speaking of the powerful and the powerless, We hadn't had enough questions tonight. I got a question for you. Why are there no scandals among the powerless? How dare the city accuse me yet for a third time tonight of pointing out, since I did it, that, wait, well, sure, but so what? Don't miss it. Why are there no scandals among the powerless? Why do you not stand there and look at the National Enquirer and its horrendous, unthinkable, or at least uncivilized, stories having to do with people you never heard of? Man in Mississippi trailer park marries 7 women. Who cares? Turns out that Tom Selleck has 6 other wives under an assumed name. Then you got headlines. Who cares if it says, woman entering Safeway in Pensacola, Florida, gets real angry at the pavement. But, and especially, of course, they could have a photograph, somebody's there, but especially the Queen of England, while exiting her carriage, catches her foot and curses audibly a cobblestone. You got your front page. Surely that's enough. You simply understand there are no scandals among the powerless. Also, there are no true scoundrels. You can't be powerless and be a scoundrel. Does anybody remember, I don't know, it must have been 2 nights ago, that I brought up this little thing about what would be the difference in being one and acting like one. What is the difference between a famous celebrity, a member of royalty, being exposed as a bigamist, and some guy you never heard of, a drywall guy down in Mississippi, is married 4 or 5 women? The latter case, nobody cares. It doesn't even qualify as a scandal. And in Mississippi, I assume, even in Mississippi, that bigamy is illegal, so the man may end up doing some time, or a judge may say, you shouldn't do that. And the judge may decide he's already been furnished enough, but that's another joke. I didn't say that. The judge said that in Mississippi. But it is not, just think for a second, you're all middle class, middle-educated people. That does not even qualify as a real scandal. A scandal has to do with those who seem to be superior to you. It has to be a scandal, it has to be with people who apparently, relative to you, are powerful. Why? This is not some collusion started by the National Enquirer and the Star and whatever they all are. It's not a collusion of any kind. It's not a conspiracy set up by people in the city. But it has always been true. And it's not just today. Think about all the scandals that you've ever read about in history. Are there any scandals involved with nobodies in history? Think about it a second. All right, the answer is no. Any scandal that's made a history book was of what? Some well-known person. Right. How about this? Said a man just around the corner. Some of these people wouldn't have been famous had it not been for the scandal, though. And to them I say, well, you're halfway around the corner. Which way are you going? You coming back? Are you coming back with that or go somewhere else? There are no scandals. There is no real history. But history is a form of scandal of the powerless. But you see, from city consciousness, it would seem to be, when I say self-evident or obvious, it's even more than that. It seems to be the only way things can be. That, well, why would history remember anyone non-powerful? But are you sure that's why? Are you sure that now, historically speaking, apparently with just ordinary bifocal sight of looking back, that only those people who are remembered seem to have been powerful. How can you be powerless and be part of a scandal? What would it take? Why is it arranged in such a way that there are no scandals among the powerless? They do the same thing. They sleep around, they take drugs, they steal, they do everything that Prince Andrew did before he got married. They do everything that some second or third generation of the Rockefellers or the Mellons or the Carnegies are doing. But why is it not truly a scandal? The same thing. Why is it that the powerless, the inferior, cannot be a part of a good scandal? You can try as much as you want to, and you may get put in jail. And you may get a little write-up somewhere in the back of the paper if they run out of absolute fillers about the coldest day in 20 years in Nome, Alaska. They might include you. But somebody else that seems to be in a position of power in the city do the same thing, and it'll be on the front page. Twee. To what end is it arranged this way? All right, now, since we're not interested at all, maybe you are, in affairs of the city, actually, what is it in you that has been involved in scandalous behavior? Think of we have a fair range here of spanning several generations, and so some of you, from your view, not mine, with no importance, but from your recalled view, yes, your nervous system can respond to 1, 2, half a dozen real scandalous acts in your past. Think about them. Were they actually scandals? Why do some of the things you remember that you did seem to be scandalous now when you think about it? Or perhaps just momentarily after you did it, that somebody jumped out and said, "Did you do that?" And you go, "Oh my God." You might have been 17. Was it actually scandalous? You have written your own history book. Life has written it in you. And it turns fleas into damn elephants. It turns drunken, uneducated drywall hangers in Mississippi, turns them into, I don't normally tell people this, but I kind of like you, boy. I'm going to tell you the truth. I married 7 women. I mean, I never get no divorce. I married 7 women. And it seems as though perhaps at that one spot there, staying in a bar, that this guy has turned himself into a scoundrel. That perhaps one other person, and not I compared to his audience, that one person staying there about as full of beer as this guy, the drywall man, and goes, "Nah." He says, "Boy, I did. Married 7 of them, took all the money they had one by one, left them, didn't fool around no divorce, just went and married another one." God, that's hard to believe. Boy, you must have lived some life. "Yeah, I did, son. There's some other things. Well, I'd like to stay, but I got to go." For a few minutes, you're almost a scoundrel compared to out there. People's memory turns them into a scoundrel. What you've done in the past, you recall now as scandalous behavior, that if it were out, my, what the world would think. The kind of stuff you've done, we could tell everybody about. Most people, the worst you do with men that you're worried about is, if my mother's still alive, what if she knew it? Other than that, we'll get somebody in the other nice big cities, New York and L.A., try to get us on a cable channel, if nothing else, some tapes, and we'll bring everybody up, and you tell us the biggest scandal in which you were ever involved. Just go ahead and spill your guts. And we'll play it, advertise it in other cities. Average, middle-class, decent people reveal their most scandalous behavior on tape. And we'll see how we compare to something, like reruns of Leave It to Beaver. See how much the world cares about what you've done. Your most shocking acts. If this is getting too Byzantine, I suggest you again I'm suggesting to you again, though, it is your known, it is the nervous system's known relative feeling and position of inferiority. That you've got to feel as though I have been my own little private Lucretia Borgia, Attila. It's like historically. We don't need centuries, we just need your lifetime. That you have now built yourself up into being a kind of, in your own history, a scoundrel. But based upon your own awareness of your inferiority. And you shout at yourself. And you get mad at yourself. But all on the basis, if you notice I hadn't changed the subject, believe it or not yet, all on the basis that I started out with. Only the powerless get shout, only the inferior get mad, only or why is it that the powerless are never involved in scandals? And you put it all together, and what have you got? You got what passes for an individual person's recollection of themselves, the awareness of what they are, and yet the very things they seem to be, it's something else, because they're a recollection of all my scandalous behavior and the way I shout at myself. You know, sometimes you stand up there and you seem to make fun of people's weaknesses, but you don't know how I suffer. Even before I met you, I talk to myself all the time. I give myself a good talking to. And I say, listen, you, and I'm always making plans. I got things stuck on the doors or on my icebox and what I should do, and I'm going to read more, and I'm going to exercise more, and I'm going to cut down on my sugar until I get it down to nothing. And I'm always reading a self-help book. Yeah, you seem to laugh at it, but I really take myself seriously. You are displaying, which is fine in the city, but why in the hell are you here and why do I keep wasting time? You are displaying everything I've been describing. Except it can't be recognized in this way unless you've got some potential of another piece of your nervous system to see it around the corner. You are displaying it's just average for the city. You're displaying your known awareness of your inferiority. That is your average. You're showing that you're powerless because you have got to have good talks with yourself. Look here, you shout. If anybody knew what they were talking about, let me jump back right quick to the city if I got to do it clear. Can you imagine an Einstein? Let's just take good old 3D world in the city. Can you imagine an Einstein type? Planck, Heisenberg, somebody, Galileo, that they had to stand up. Finally, Einstein has his right forum. I think he originally printed it. But let's say that the International 1929 or what it was, International Convention of famous and would-be famous physicists. And they say, here he is, a brand new guy from America by way of Germany. Let's give him a big hand, little Albert Einstein, whoever he is. Come on out, Al. And he comes out and he starts saying, and he goes into his little speech, and he tries to build up, and he begins to try and shout, and people begin to take a little nap, and some people mill around, and he has to shout, and he has to get mad. Of you dunderheads, don't you realize what I've discovered? Now you realize that doesn't sound right. That doesn't taste right. You'd think, maybe he was drunk. But that doesn't sound right. If somebody had a great idea, if somebody had some superior truth, if there was indeed in a full four-dimensional sense a real cognoscenti, would they have to shout even if they didn't speak Italian? Would they shout? If you knew what you were doing internally, would you shout? Would you have to have serious talks with yourself like, look, we got to straighten up. We got to stop getting so mad. We've got to quit overeating. We need to cut down on our drinking and perhaps taper off to the point that we can stop someday in this decade. No. Those who could simply don't have to talk, much less shout. And they certainly don't get mad, because if you were in some position of authority, if there was some possibility of you exerting real power over yourself, then everything else, every aspect of you as you now perceive it, would be your inferior. And people don't shout at their inferiors. Well, let's see, how far did I get behind tonight? Every night I get an hour behind, so. I think I'll stop. We're so far behind now, every time I think about it, I begin to get the blues, and I want to shout and get mad and have a drink. And my face slipped, I'm sorry. I think we will stop. I got a little excursion after the children and the public people leave the room. We're back on. The excursion, we ran a tape Monday night. I wanted to give it, but you recall, well, I was talking about Monday, on the basis that a real fripp, when I was trying to not define, expand upon it, that I was simply pointing out that somebody, even at the ordinary level, actually was a full-blown thinking creature. Why would they ever do anything they didn't intend to do? Everybody remembers that. That was here, right? And I threw in some examples, and I sketched around and skated on edges of it and talked about apparently out there and then here, and I was using things like getting pregnant, drinking enough to get sick, getting into relationships that continually seem to bring about heartbreak. Now simply pointing out, why would a person who could actually use the yellow circuit as the dictionary, and as people in the city believe that it should be used as has been described, if they could just do that, why would they ever do anything they didn't intend to do and say, oh, surprise, surprise, I'm all swole up, I think I'm pregnant. And the man go, how could that be? Or for people, whatever it is, they continue to find themselves in these, what do they call them in the city? Situations. That's it, I got to remember that. In these situations. I keep looking up in the dictionary about once a year, and I still don't understand what the hell it means. Oh, I understand what you guys mean, but situation, how in the world, how slow, how dull did life get at one time that it had to come up with this word and this concept of a situation? Like, and you people, that is city consciousness, believes a situation's actually a thing. No, show me one. Well, all right, this thing, that's a situation. No, it's... All right, the situation. Besides the little things I skated around and talked about, I wanted to give you something to neuralize, to ponder upon your own. Just, as always, it's not a contest. You can write them down, not write them down, but just see what strikes you, what comes to your own mind, that if indeed we're talking about a full fripp, a full functioning yellow circuit driven person, or a person making the full blown use of the intellect, what sorts of things that are just happen all the time to people? They just run of the mill. What sort of things normally happen that such a person would no longer let happen? Not through some strange, eerie, metaphysical, spiritual, time warp, Twilight Zone reason, but just on the basis that if you had a person that the intellect was operating on all 8 cylinders, good spark, clean plugs, looking after their own best interest, whatever it might be, or looked at another way, at least not doing anything in life that at any time they went, oops, how did that happen? Of course, there's one answer to that. If we're talking about along this line of actually at the city level of somebody using the yellow circuit to its full potential, then of course the question is, how did this happen? The answer is, well, it wasn't being fully used. I slipped. I looked off. I took a nappy poo. I went somewhere. Hello, I wasn't home. It is simply that I quit using it. That's the answer in the city. But I'm asking you, what sorts of things are normal? What sorts of things are the normal flow of the human soap opera that happens to you and everybody else? that just on that basis, nothing strange at all, but if the yellow circuit was operating in the full manner in which the dictionary says it should, in which people in the city believe it should, what sorts of quite ordinary circumstances and things would not occur to such a person? Whew. I could have given that in about 30 seconds, but I didn't. It's too late now. Or it's too early to stop from doing such as that. If you see what I mean.